Clap your hands and stomp your feet. You're listening to the Clap Your Hands podcast, hosted by Eliot Shorr-Parks and Kyle Newbeck. Here they come.
Yeah, so let's just dive right into this. Kind of like how the Sixers have dove right into the offseason. I want to talk to you about James Harden, the current situation that's going on. Maybe some broader pictures about how this is viewed around the league, but the latest news, and I'm sure you are up to date on this, James Harden has unfollowed Daryl Morey on Twitter. As we all know, there is no greater diss in the world than unfollowing somebody on Twitter. So it does not seem like the relationship is getting any better. He was fined $100,000 by the NBA for his comments, calling Daryl Morey a liar. I guess the first question, just get started for you, would be, what do you make of this situation? Like, what are your takeaways on it? How do you see it playing out? Just what do you think of with the Harden kind of trade saga?
Just that it's unfortunate. I would say unfortunate, and with all due respect to James Harden, I feel like unnecessary. I really, like, we have some sense of what drove him to this point. We can divine a few things about why James Harden wants out. But I'm just going to push all that to the side for the moment. It doesn't make sense to me in just the broadest strokes. James Harden is the second best player, let's say, key player on a team that is absolutely in the discussion to win the East every year that he and Joel Embiid are together. Hasn't been that long yet. But if you are a top-level player on a top-level team, still making top-level money in a major market in 2023 in the NBA, I don't know what else you're looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is about contracts and promises or perceived promises or value, perceived value, pecking order, whatever it may be, the bottom line to me is this is a baffling stance by a player who, to date, still has not achieved what you would believe to be his highest goals in this league, and has, a ticking clock. He's 34 in a few days as we speak here today. Time's running out, and he's asking to be traded away from the actual MVP, the standing, literal, reigning MVP. We don't see this often. I thought it was a shock when Kyrie Irving wanted to be traded away from LeBron James 8 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever it's been now. And that to me was a shock at the time. Why would you want to be traded away from LeBron James? Why would you want to be traded away from a generational superstar, potentially the best player in the history of the game? And this one, while on a different scale, strikes me pretty much the same way. At least in Kyrie Irving's case, he won a ring first. And then said, I want to do something different. And he was younger and had the potential to still map out a career where maybe I'm the centerpiece, or maybe it's a different situation, or maybe I'm just not in this guy's shadow. James Harden is past his prime, clearly on the downside of his career, and in his mid-30s. I don't get it. I just don't get it. And if I don't get it, I'm not trying to be naive here, but I do think to an extent, too much often is left for us to just assume or interpret. He has not come out straight out and said why he made the trade demand. He hasn't. He's not clarified that in the least. So that's on him as to why I personally, and I think many others probably, are baffled.
Well, what I thought, and baffled is a great word for this. A few days ago, Reggie Miller kind of echoed those sentiments that you said of, when's the last time, and Kyrie's like probably the best example, a player has demanded away from the current NBA MVP. Like when players ask for trades normally, look at Dame Lillard in Portland. It's because he doesn't feel he can win there. Generally, that's why players will demand out. Harden has a legitimate chance to win the title in Philadelphia next year. They had a chance last year. As long as they have Embiid, they'll have a chance. If you add Harden to that, you will have that chance. My question for you is, when Harden was traded to Philadelphia, it was coming off the Brooklyn saga. It was coming off the Houston saga. But Daryl Morey was here the first year, kind of throwing it all together. Obviously, the second year, he has a much better year. How is Harden viewed around the league? Because part of this, I think that the problem is not many teams want him. Like the Clippers seem to have some level of interest. I think the Sixers obviously have interest in having him on the roster, but there are not 5, 6, 7 teams out there that are interested in signing him. Probably part of the reason he opted in. What's his reputation like around the league currently? And do you agree with my sentiment that there is not a ton of interest in teams having him around the league?
Yeah, I mean, look, no, the market is not exactly robust for him at the moment. Partially because of his age, partially because of the stage of his the stage of his career that he is currently in, and partially just the fact that this is his third trade demand in 2 years or 3 years, and in every case, he's been the catalyst for breaking up something that had some potential, right? Like I wasn't a big believer in the Harden and Westbrook alignment in Houston, but still you had James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and some decent players, and he decided it was time to go and time to blow it up. He lands in Brooklyn, and look, I get that one. I can't really argue with a frustration with Kyrie Irving never being available, and then you can combine that with the injuries they had, everything. Like I kind of get that, but it doesn't really matter. At a certain point, the league looks at you for who you are, what you've done, what you haven't done, and it's the old, you are what your record says you are. Like same for a player's profile and his standing in the league. He is who we perceive him to be, a guy who seems perpetually discontent with where he is and seems to be putting other things ahead of winning titles. Because if pursuit of a championship at this stage of his career were the primary goal, he should just stay where he is, because he's on one of a handful of teams that have a legit chance. Again, with the reigning MVP, he might go to another good situation. He may go to potentially an equivalent situation, and I would argue with whether or not the Clippers are an equivalent situation given how much injury volatility that team has. But you're not going to find a markedly better situation. Because anyone who could give you a better path probably doesn't need you, or probably doesn't feel like you'd be the best fit. So there's a lot of problems here. I mean, I was jotting down a bunch of notes before we came on just about how to assess his value at this stage. So as I mentioned earlier, he's turning 34 on Saturday, but guards generally decline in their early to mid 30s, and he's never been a guy who relied on the kind of explosive athleticism that we often associate with the all-time great, especially like, say, shooting guard types. We can argue whether he's a shooting guard, point guard. I don't think it matters. But you see it in his free throw rate. His free throw rate this past season was 4.29. That's the lowest since his rookie year. If you want to put it in free throws per game instead, it was 6.2 per game. That's the lowest since he left OKC. And he was at 11.8 free throw attempts a game as recently as 2019-20. And it's dipped down to 7.3, bounced up to 8.2, and then down to 6.2. There's the playoff woes throughout his career. That factors into his trade value. There's the messy endings with Houston and Brooklyn and now Philly that are going to have an impact on how the league perceives him. That he's worn out partnerships with a litany of other stars factors into this. He's still an elite playmaker, led the league in assists, obviously, last season. He's still a really potent scorer. He can still be an occasional number one option, although I don't think you want him as your everyday number one option. But I'm not convinced that the Sixers are going to get the star in return that Daryl Morey's hoping for. And I'm not sure that he's getting the boatload of picks either that he would then want to turn into another star. Yeah. But, and you have to rule out a bunch of teams, right? There's a bunch of lottery teams that have no use for a 34-year-old James Harden. There are rebuilding teams and mid-level teams where he's just not going to push them forward enough. There's teams that just don't need another ball-dominant guard. I do believe, and I don't know who the teams are. I'm told there was like 3 or 4 teams, counting the Clippers, that
are interested in Harden.
Yeah, that would have some interest. I try to scratch out my best guesses as to who might make a run at him. It's not that great a list. I mean, I wonder if Brooklyn would go down that path again.
Wow.
That's just thinking out loud.
But you're right. You don't often see a reunion like that.
No, but he left because Kyrie was driving him crazy, and there was other issues there too. But like, the Nets want to win right now, and they could have parlayed Mikal Bridges and some of these guys into something else. They could have taken another step back. They didn't. They decided to keep it together. But this is not. It's not a high-level playoff team in Brooklyn. Harden plus the guys they have might be kind of interesting. I'm not saying it's a likely scenario.
Harden and Ben Simmons coming into Philadelphia would be quite the quite the matchup, to say the least.
That would be a blast. Miami, if they miss out on Dame Lillard, is an obvious one to factor into this. The Bulls are going to be missing Lonzo Ball for yet another season, and that's a team that doesn't seem to care about the future at all. They're all just about trying to tread water and be decent right now, and they keep doubling down on the group they have. So who knows? Would they throw Harden into the mix with the rest of that group? I don't know if they can even make a deal if they've got the assets to do it, or could do it without trading Zach LaVine. But Orlando.
It would be a weird move for them, but they could use them. But again, I think that's what's really interesting about the Harden thing. Not to cut you off, is like they're really you only really want him if you're a championship contender, and if you're a championship contender, you mostly probably already have great guard play. Like there's not many teams that need point guards that are competing for a legitimate title.
The Nuggets don't need James Harden,
right?
Like the Boston Celtics and Milwaukee Bucks do not. I don't think need James Harden, and I don't think would make a run at James Harden. Like who? Like that's the problem here. I mean, I'm reaching for Orlando. They want to make that next step, and they're weak at guard and playmaking. Like, okay, what about a 1-year flyer? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think about where it's logical. Like, Charlotte just desperate to be relevant to do anything.
Right.
Minnesota would even fit next to Anthony Edwards, but there's another team that really is I want to say desperate, but kind of desperate-ish.
Well, and then also, like, what are the Sixers getting back? Like, I don't think they would take.
Yeah,
like Rudy Gobert. Like, I just don't think there's a match there. But what's interesting too is you go through all these teams. The team that needs James Harden is the Sixers. Like Tyrese Maxey is not proven yet as a playmaking facilitator. We'll see what he can do under Nick Nurse. But Tyrese currently is probably at his best as an off-ball guard, shooter, scorer in bunches type of guy. Harden came in, made Embiid MVP, or at least contributed in helping him win it. So if we move the idea of a trade off the table, like I agree, there's not many teams, you're probably not going to get much back. The only way he's traded is if it's so ugly that the Sixers are like, we just have to get this guy out of our facility and out of our locker room. You've probably, obviously covered Daryl Morey for a long time. What do you think about this whole idea of like a backroom deal? He calls him a liar. He's fined because once you accept maybe a trade doesn't make sense or is not going to happen, the next bridge is how are they going to reintegrate him to the locker room, reintegrate him to the franchise? Like, what do you have any theories on where this is coming from? Like, I think there's backroom deals in the NBA all the time, but you rarely see it come across where a player calls a front office executive a liar because there was some type of handshake that he didn't feel was honored. What do you think of the situation between Daryl and Harden right now?
I think that there's a lot less known than anybody wants to admit for public discussion. I think we're making a lot of assumptions. Is it possibly about a wink deal a year ago about I'm going to take less now and get the payoff in a year? Maybe. Logical to assume, logical to discuss, but we don't know that. We don't know that. If that were the case and it was that knowable, the NBA would have rung up the Sixers to the nth degree by now.
Yeah, especially when they already investigated last year with the tampering with Tucker.
Investigated and essentially, I don't want to say cleared, but they did not find evidence of or clear enough evidence of the Sixers making that wink deal. Because if they had, this would have gone down a year ago. There would have been a whole mess. And people can go look up Minnesota Timberwolves Joe Smith from 1,000 years ago and look at how that turned out. Different times, different commissioner, but still, the league takes this stuff very, very seriously. You can't, if they find you guilty of cap circumvention and wink deals, there's going to be a price to pay. I don't think the league office, from what I know of the league office, would be going out of its way to do Daryl any favors. So, if anything we're there, we would have known by now. So then there's a second investigation this past few weeks. Or past week and a half, whatever it was.
Yeah, it's hard to keep the timeline on this.
Also, it's the summer. It's all just blurs together.
Exactly, yeah.
And this is focused more on James Harden calling Daryl Morey a liar. Ooh, he called him a liar. Is that because there was a wink deal that he reneged on? No, according to everything that we have heard and everything that we've been told. And it's just about the fact that he opted in and said, I want to be traded. and the Sixers said, okay, we'll trade you as soon as we can find the right deal or whatever. And the deal hasn't happened. And then the Sixers make indicate through channels that they're expecting to just bring him to camp, and that the trade is not happening anytime soon. And that's what sets off James Harden, seemingly. So if the investigation was just about that, so James Harden is the one who gets dinged now for $100,000 because that was effectively a manifestation of a public trade demand. At least that's the way the league sees it. The union disagrees and is appealing this ruling to an arbitrator. But again, the conclusion has to be based on what we have in front of us, not based on what we want to assume or what we speculate or what we think might have happened. Based on what's in front of us, this is not about cap circumvention or a wink-wink deal from a year ago. It's about James Harden wanting to be traded and the Sixers saying, we can't trade you right now, or we're not going to trade you right now, and we expect you to come to camp. And then James Harden calls Daryl Morey a liar over that. That's where we are. If people want to interpret it other ways, I get it. But that's what we have in front of us. That's the only thing to me that we can go on objectively. And so if that's the case, again, I understand James Harden's upset that he hasn't been dealt, and specifically to the Clippers, but he created this. If he wanted to leave the Sixers that badly, he could have not opted in. He could have gone to free agency. He didn't, because there wasn't enough of a market, obviously. Once he opts in, you are at the mercy of the team that holds your contract and of the market. And if the Sixers, and I've said the same thing many times about Damian Lillard and the Blazers, although they're very different situations beyond this top line. But if you want to be traded and you make a trade demand and you narrow the field too much by saying, I'll only go to Miami, I'll only go to the Clippers, you've hurt yourself, because you've hurt the ability of the team to actually get the value that they feel they need to save face or to simply function. And if the Sixers can't get what they deem proper value for James Harden, then they shouldn't trade him. That's fairly straightforward. And the guy has a contract. You can't hold out in the NBA. He'll be docked pay, as Ben Simmons was. And as I think we all know now, there is an obscure rule that has been on the books for a while where if he basically just decides to sit out the season, he can't become a free agent next summer. So there's a lot of consequences for James Harden if he keeps going down this path.
So one worry from Sixers fans has been a potential consequence of this is Daryl Morey's reputation around the league gets, sullied, because whether it's true, whether it's not true, we know often that doesn't really matter. Like James Harden, a very public profile, knows a lot of the stars around the league, that if he is calling Daryl Morey a liar and but in back channels is, saying, hey, like this guy promised me something and he backed off of it. Do you think this will impact the Sixers' ability to recruit stars at all? Because next year, it seems currently their plan is to have a ton of cap space next year. I think they'll only have, I believe, Embiid, Maxey, and maybe PJ on the books. So they are going to have, I think, enough potentially for 2 max spaces, if not 1, plus another decent-sized contract. Do you think this whole thing will impact the way players or agents view Morey around the league and their willingness to come to Philadelphia?
Daryl's always been kind of a polarizing figure, in the league ever since he first rose to prominence with the Rockets back in mid 2000s. He's had a lot of success despite that, whether it's trading for guys, signing guys. I think, I thought about this a lot with the Brooklyn situation, right? Kyrie Irving said some things on the way out. I think Harden might have even said some things. I don't remember if Durant said some things. Again, it's all a blur at this stage. But, the Nets made a trade that got them Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson. They're still, would they be able to trade for that same level of talent or a higher degree of talent if they were in free agency right now trying to chase superstars? Would things that were said or perceived about the way Sean Marks and Joe Tsai ran the place, would it hurt them? It hasn't really been tested yet, right? Historically, I think in the 26 years I've covered the league, I do think some teams suffer for the way that they have operated over a long haul, right? Like the Clippers were a laughingstock for a long time. The Bullets/Wizards were a laughingstock for a long time. The Sacramento Kings were a laughingstock. And they were, but it was about players and their agents looking at a franchise and saying, that place doesn't develop guys well, or that place is really volatile and they're constantly firing coaches and GMs. That place hasn't been good for guys' careers. And I don't think that's the case with Philly, and I don't think that's the case with Daryl Morey in Houston or Philly. Like
Sure.
a lot of he's discovered a lot of guys. He's helped boost a lot of guys' careers. Again, James Harden was a sixth man at the moment that they bet on him in that trade to Houston. Nobody knew what James Harden was going to be. Even Daryl Morey didn't know what James Harden was going to become. He'll say it himself, I think. So I don't think there's any track record of the Sixers and or Daryl Morey adversely impacting guys' careers. And I think that's what it would eventually come down to. Now, would agents look askew because of what Harden says? I think there's going to be some consider the source type discussions,
True. Yes.
right? It's like when Kyrie lobs grenades at the Nets. It's like, okay, but it's Kyrie. How many people are putting that much stock in Kyrie Irving's assessment? So my best guess, and it's only a guess, is that this will not impact the Sixers' ability to recruit talent, but it's kind of a time will tell situation.
Well, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button right here. You'll get all the videos in a playlist, and make sure you leave a comment in the section below to let us know what you think.
And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date. All our latest updates, new episodes, new podcasts. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.